Caleb walked over to the wall and switched the thermostat completely off. He looked me dead in the eye. "Heat is expensive," he said. "Wear a sweater while I'm gone, and don't let my mother run up the bills." Behind him, his dying mother shivered under a thin blanket on the couch. He didn't even look at her. He just grabbed his suitcase and walked out the door. "I need to know what is the pettiest, coldest thing a partner has ever done to you, to save money while spending it on themselves. Drop it in the comments. I'm reading everything." 2 weeks later, the water heater died. I spent my morning boiling pots of water on the stove just to sponge bathe Margaret because the pipes were frozen and the shower ran like liquid ice. When I texted Caleb to ask for $200 to call a plumber, he left me on red for 6 hours before replying with a single line. "We can't afford luxuries. Improvise." Luxuries. Hot water was a luxury. But apparently, letting his mother rot in a freezing house was just good budgeting. I was running on 3 hours of sleep and caffeine fumes. My name is Phoenix. I am 29 years old, and I am a forensic bookkeeper for small businesses. My entire career is built on noticing when numbers don't add up, on finding the story hidden in the ledger. But love makes you stupid. Love makes you look at a red flag and see a confetti parade. I had spent 3 years ignoring the missing cash and the late nights because I wanted to believe in the marriage. That afternoon, Margaret ran out of pain medication. Her insurance had lapsed because Caleb stopped paying the premiums months ago, another detail he forgot to mention before he left for Germany. I didn't have the cash. I had used my last paycheck to buy heating oil because he had canceled that contract too. So, with my hands shaking from the cold, I pulled out the emergency credit card. The one we agreed was strictly for life or death situations. I logged into the banking app to check the balance. I just needed $50. The screen loaded, and the air left my lungs. Pending transaction. Sapphire Beach Club, Cabo San Lucas. $800. Pending transaction. VIP table service, El Squid Row. $1,200. I stared at the glowing screen until the numbers blurred. Germany. He was supposed to be in Germany, freezing in a warehouse, working double shifts to save our family. But Germany doesn't have a Sapphire Beach Club. Germany doesn't have transactions time-stamped in the Mountain Standard Time Zone. I clicked on the transaction details. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lifestyle. He hadn't gone to Europe to work. He had gone to Mexico to party. He had left his wife and his dying mother in a house he turned into a refrigerator so he could spend $2,000 on bottle service in a single afternoon. The rage that hit me wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call him right then and there. To scream until my throat bled. To demand answers. To threaten him with everything I had. My thumb hovered over his contact name. But I stopped. In my line of work, we have a rule. You never let the embezzler know you found the leak. If you scream, they shred the documents. If you panic, they hide the assets. You have to be quiet. You have to be still. I put the phone down on the counter. I didn't call him. I didn't text him. I didn't like the post he made 5 minutes later about grinding hard in the Berlin cold. I became a ghost in my own house. I realized that noise was my enemy. If I stayed silent, if I played dead like a possum, he would think he was safe. He would keep spending. He would keep leaving a paper trail. And he would walk right into the trap I was about to build. I took a screenshot of the bank statement, saved it to a hidden folder, and went back to the stove to boil more water. Margaret passed away 3 nights later. But before she let go, she gave me the weapon that would destroy her son. It was 3 a.m. The house was silent, save for the wind rattling the loose window frames Caleb had promised to fix a year ago. I was sitting by her bedside, counting her breaths, when her hand suddenly gripped my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by that final burst of energy people get right before the end. She pulled me close. Her voice was a dry rasp, but her eyes were clear. Fierce. "He thinks I'm stupid," she whispered. "He thinks I'm broke. He thinks I'm just a burden he can leave in the cold." I tried to hush her, to tell her to save her strength. But she shook her head. "The root cellar," she said. "Dig in the corner. Under the old pickle jar. It's yours, Phoenix. Not his. Never his." After she drifted back into unconsciousness, I grabbed a flashlight and went down to the cellar. It was a dirt floor nightmare that smelled of wet earth and decay. Caleb hated this room. He used to joke that the only thing down here was spiders and his mother's hoarding problem. He laughed at her treasures. He didn't know that his laughter was the reason he was about to lose everything. I found the heavy ceramic pickle jar in the corner, covered in a decade of dust. I pushed it aside and started digging with a garden trowel. The dirt was packed hard, freezing my fingers, but I didn't stop. 2 feet down. Metal hit metal. I pulled out a rusty biscuit tin. It was wrapped in plastic, heavy and cold. I sat there on the damp floor, my breath fogging in the flashlight beam, and pried the lid open. I expected cash. Maybe a few $1,000s she'd squirreled away from her pension. Instead, I found a key to a safety deposit box and a stack of papers. On top was a property deed. I recognized it immediately. It was the deed to the 40 acres of swampland in the next county. Caleb had tried to sell it for years, but nobody wanted it. He called it the mud pit. He told everyone it was worthless, just another example of his mother's bad investments. But underneath the deed was an envelope. It was crumpled, unopened, and postmarked 2 weeks ago. It was from the State Highway Commission. I opened it, my hands shaking. It was a notice of intent to purchase. Highway Expansion Project 4B. Offer price. $320,000. The air left the room. The land wasn't worthless. The state needed it for the new interstate, and they were paying a premium. Margaret had received this letter while Caleb was packing his bags for Germany. She had hidden it. She had buried it in the dirt because she knew if Caleb saw it, he would take the money, dump her in a state facility, and vanish. She had protected this asset with her life. And in her final moments, she decided to hand it to me. I looked at the number again. $320,000. This wasn't just an inheritance. This was a loaded gun. And Caleb, partying in Cabo, had absolutely no idea the safety was off. I didn't call a lawyer. Lawyers are slow, expensive, and obsessed with the truth. I needed something faster. I needed something that felt like a heart attack on paper. So I opened my laptop and did what I do best. I opened Excel. I had the real notice of intent to Leanne from the hospital. It was for $15,000, the cost of Margaret's final days in hospice care that Caleb had refused to pay for. $15,000 was a lot of money to me, but it wasn't enough to terrify a narcissist. Caleb would just laugh at that number. He'd tell me to figure it out. He'd tell me to sell my jewelry. I needed a number that would threaten his existence. I started typing. I created a spreadsheet titled Projected Estate Liability and Federal Garnishment. I entered the real $15,000. Then I added rows for Medicaid estate recovery, mandatory clawback. I added compound penalty interest. I added legal defense retainers and state tax levies. I wasn't forging legal documents. I was simply creating a financial projection based on the worst-case scenario. It's what forensic accountants do every day. I just happened to be projecting a scenario where the government decided to eat us alive. By the time I was done, the bottom line wasn't $15,000. It was $212,000. And right next to it, in bold red letters, I typed, liable party, property owners of record. That was the key. As long as his name was on the deed to this house, that debt was attached to his social security number. It was attached to his credit score. It was attached to the secret bank accounts he thought I didn't know about. I took a deep breath. I messed up my hair. I splashed cold water on my face to make sure I sounded breathless and terrified. Then, I dialed his number. He answered on the fourth ring. Make it quick, Phoenix, he snapped. I'm in a meeting. I could hear the meeting. It sounded like wind chimes and a blender crushing ice. Caleb, you have to help me, I cried, letting my voice crack perfectly. The county sheriff just left a notice on the door. It's bad. It's really bad. What are you talking about? Calm down. They're saying we owe the state over $200,000 for your mom's medical bills. I lied, staring at my spreadsheet. They said because the house is in both our names, they're going to seize it. But Caleb, the lawyer said it's worse than that. What do you mean, worse? His voice lost its arrogance. He said if the house doesn't cover the debt, they go after the owners personally. They garnish wages. They freeze personal bank accounts. They can take everything. Silence on the other end. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He wasn't thinking about me. He wasn't thinking about his dead mother. He was thinking about his gambling stash. He was thinking about the cash he'd been siphoning off for his trip. If the government froze his accounts, his fun was over. You let them run up a $200,000 bill? He shouted. I told you to keep costs down. You useless. I didn't know. I sobbed, putting on the performance of a lifetime. They call it estate recovery. They're aggressive, Caleb. They said they start freezing assets in 48 hours. 48 hours? I heard the panic now. Genuine, uncut fear. I can't have my accounts frozen. I'm doing international business. That would ruin the deal. I don't know what to do. I whimpered. I can't pay this. I'm going to lose my credit. I'm going to go bankrupt. Stop crying and listen to me, he hissed. Is there a way out? Did the lawyer say anything? He said, the only way to protect you is if you aren't an owner anymore. I said, my voice trembling. He said if you sign a quitclaim deed, if you transfer your half of the house to me before the lien hits, then the debt stays with the house. It stays with me. You'd be clear. So I just give you the house? It's not a house, Caleb, it's a liability. I screamed back. It's a debt trap. I'm trying to save you from paying 200 grand. If you don't want to sign, fine. Come home and explain to the IRS why you have offshore transactions while owing the state money. That did it. The mention of the IRS was the kill shot. Fine, he said. Fine. I'm coming back. Not because I want to see you, but because I have to fix your mess. Set up a meeting with a notary. I want this done tonight. He hung up. I stared at the phone. He wasn't coming back to mourn his mother. He wasn't coming back to comfort his wife. He was flying home from paradise to dump a massive debt onto my shoulders and run back to his mistress. He thought he was escaping a trap. He didn't realize he was running full speed into the slaughterhouse. Caleb didn't come home. He told me to meet him at a 24-hour notary office in a strip mall next to a vape shop. He said he didn't want to step foot in that freezing house until the debt was settled. He walked in at midnight, dragging a designer carry-on that looked brand new. He wasn't wearing his work clothes. He was wearing a linen suit that cost more than my car, and his skin had the deep, bronze tan you don't get from a German winter. He smelled like duty-free cologne and expensive tequila. He looked like a man who had been living in paradise while his mother died in the dark. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask about the funeral. He just looked at the notary, a tired woman named Brenda who clearly wanted to go home, and snapped his fingers. Let's get this over with. I have a flight to catch in the morning. I placed the stack of documents on the table. My hands were shaking, partly from adrenaline, partly because I had to keep up the act of the terrified, incompetent wife. On top was the spreadsheet I had created. The numbers were bold, red, and horrifying. Here's the breakdown, I said, my voice trembling. The hospital lien, the state tax levy, the penalties. It's all here. Caleb glanced at the paper with disdain. He hates reading financial documents. He thinks details are for the help. He reached for the pen, eager to sign away his liability so he could run back to his fantasy life. But then, his hand stopped. He narrowed his eyes at the total. $200,000. Wait, he said, pulling his hand back. This is insane. They can't just attach this to me personally. Maybe I should have my lawyer look at this first. My heart hammered against my ribs. If he called a lawyer, any lawyer, the game was over. A lawyer would see through my projection in 5 seconds. A lawyer would check the property value. A lawyer would tell him to keep the deed. I had to pivot. Instantly, I leaned in close, dropping my voice to a frantic whisper. I pointed a shaking finger at line 14 of my fabricated spreadsheet. Caleb, look at this clause, I hissed. Subject to federal garnishment of all associated assets, including offshore and digital holdings. He froze. The lawyer told me that once the state files the lien, it triggers an automatic audit. I lied, looking him straight in the eye. He said if they find any other accounts attached to your name, crypto, betting apps, anything you haven't declared, they freeze them immediately. To pay the debt. I saw the blood drain from his tan face. I had hit the nerve. I knew about his online gambling addiction. I knew he had been siphoning money into accounts he thought were secret. He wasn't afraid of the debt. He was terrified of the exposure. He was terrified of the IRS finding his stash. They'll freeze everything? He whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. Everything. Unless. I pushed the quitclaim deed toward him. Unless you aren't the owner anymore. If you sign this, you're transferring the property to me for $1. You're legally severing your tie to the asset. The debt stays with the house. It stays with me. You walk away clean. He looked at the deed. Then he looked at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of pity in his eyes. Not for me, but for how stupid he thought I was. He thought I was voluntarily taking a bullet for him. He thought he was winning. You're really willing to take this on? He asked, trying to hide the relief in his voice. You're going to ruin your credit for me? I have to save the family, I said, choking back a fake sob. Just sign it, Caleb. Go back to work. I'll handle the mess. You're a good wife, Phoenix, he said. A little dramatic, but good. He grabbed the pen. He signed his name with a flourish. Caleb D. Vance. Brenda, the notary, stamped it. Thump. That sound was the sweetest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a steel trap snapping shut. He handed the paper to me. There. It's your problem now. The house, the debt, everything. I own nothing. Thank you, I said, taking the paper. You have no idea how much this helps. While he was zipping up his jacket, checking his reflection in the window, I slid my hand under the table. I opened a text thread with a contact saved as dispatch. I typed 4 words. Target is stationary. Go. Caleb walked out of that notary office like he was walking onto a red carpet. The cold wind hit us in the parking lot, but he didn't even shiver. He was too insulated by the warmth of his own arrogance. You enjoy that debt, babe. He laughed, spinning his car keys around his finger. I'm going back to Germany. I'm free. He pulled out his phone, probably to call his little sister Kayla and tell her the good news. I watched the screen light up in the darkness, but he didn't make a call. He stopped walking. He stared at a notification that had just popped up. It was Instagram. I knew it was coming because I had been tracking her account all day. Kayla wasn't stupid. When the credit card declined at the hotel bar that morning because I had reported it stolen, she didn't wait around for an explanation. She booked a flight. Caleb stared at the photo. It was a selfie of Kayla in a first-class seat, holding a glass of champagne. The caption was brutal. Single era, starts now. No more deadbeats. Number by broke boy. She left? He whispered, looking up at me with genuine confusion. She thinks I'm broke? She knows you're broke, I said, my voice dropping its frantic pitch. Because I canceled the cards this morning. You what? Before he could step toward me, a diesel engine roared to life behind us. High beams flooded the parking lot, blinding him. A tow truck reversed violently, tires screeching on the asphalt. It didn't slow down. It backed straight up to Caleb's leased luxury SUV. The driver, a guy in a heavy jacket I'd spoken to an hour ago, jumped out and had the chains hooked to the axle before Caleb even realized what was happening. Hey! Caleb screamed, running toward the truck. Hey! That's my car! What are you doing? The driver didn't even look at him. He just looked at me and tapped his clipboard. Target acquired. They can't take my car! Caleb shouted, turning on me. I paid the lease. No, I said. The tears were gone. The trembling was gone. I stood there, perfectly still in the cold night air. You didn't pay the lease. You spent the lease money on bottle service in Cabo, and I stopped covering for you 3 months ago. You. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. You stopped paying? I stopped paying the car. I stopped paying the credit cards. I stopped paying the insurance. I took a step closer to him. Everything you have is rented, Caleb. Your car, your clothes, your lifestyle, even your girlfriend was a subscription service, and you just missed a payment. I watched him standing there as his SUV was lifted into the air. He looked small. Without the car, without the money, without the swagger. He wasn't a powerful businessman. He was just a terrified child in a parking lot. You ruined me, he hissed, his face twisting into something ugly. Fine. Take the car. I still have the house off my back. You're the one drowning in 200 grand of debt. I smiled. It was the first real smile I'd felt in years. I reached into my bag and pulled out the crumpled letter from the State Highway Commission. The one Margaret had hidden for me. Read it, I said. He squinted at the paper under the parking lot lights. I watched his eyes scan the lines. Notice of intent to purchase. Offer price. $300. He choked. $320,000? The state isn't seizing the house, Caleb, I said softly. They're buying the land for the new interstate. And since you just signed that quitclaim deed to hide the asset, you didn't dodge a debt. You just gave me a $320,000 property for $1. He looked at the paper. He looked at the deed in my hand. Then he looked at me. And I saw the exact moment his soul broke. You tricked me, he whispered. You can't do this. I didn't trick you. You signed it because you wanted to commit fraud. You signed it because you wanted to cheat the government. I turned toward my own car. A beat-up sedan that was fully paid for. It's called the doctrine of unclean hands, Caleb. You can't sue for a property you gave away to commit a crime. You played yourself. I got in my car and locked the doors. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The tow truck was gone with his SUV. He was standing alone in the empty parking lot, clutching his designer suitcase, typing frantically on a phone that I knew had just been disconnected. He was the king of nothing. And his reign was officially over. 1 month later, the radiator in the hallway hummed to life. It was a low, steady vibration that shook the floorboards, a sound I hadn't heard in 3 years. I walked over to the thermostat and turned it up to 72. Not because I was cold, but because I could. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to count pennies for heating oil, and signed the final closing documents for the land sale. The State Highway Commission didn't negotiate. They wired $320,000 into my new, individual bank account that morning. But Caleb, true to his nature, didn't go down quietly. A week ago, I received a letter. It wasn't from a high-powered firm. It was from a lawyer who advertised on bus stop benches. Caleb was suing me for fraudulent inducement. He claimed I had tricked him into signing the quitclaim deed under false pretenses. He wanted the land back. He wanted the money. He wanted to drag me into court and paint me as the villain. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, a woman named Grace, who had handled the estate. She didn't panic. She didn't even schedule a meeting. She just sent a one-page response that killed the lawsuit before it could take its first breath. She cited the doctrine of unclean hands. In the eyes of the law, you cannot ask the court for an equitable remedy if you acted in bad faith regarding the subject of the complaint. Caleb had signed that deed specifically to hide assets from the government. He had signed it to evade a debt he believed was real. He had signed it with the intent to commit fraud. Because his hands were unclean, the court would not help him recover the property he gave away to commit a crime. He had legally checkmated himself. The lawsuit was dropped 3 days later. His lawyer realized he wouldn't get paid and walked away. I used a portion of the money to give Margaret the funeral she deserved. No budget casket. No rushed service. I buried her in the plot next to her husband, under a granite headstone that cost more than Caleb had spent on me in our entire marriage. It was the last thing I could do for the woman who had saved me. As for the rest of the players in this tragedy, gravity took over. Kayla didn't just leave, she scorched the earth. I heard through a mutual friend that she sold the jewelry Caleb had bought her on my credit card, and used the cash to move to LA. She blocked him on everything. To her, he was just a bad investment that she liquidated before the crash. And Caleb? The last I heard, he was living in a weekly rate motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where you pay cash and don't ask questions. He isn't working. He can't work. He spends his days looking over his shoulder because the people he borrowed money from to fund his high-roller lifestyle aren't the kind who send polite letters. They are the kind who show up in parking lots. He wanted to be free of his mother. He wanted to be free of his wife. He wanted to be free of this house. Now, he is free of everything. I sold the farmhouse 3 weeks ago. A developer bought it for the land value, planning to bulldoze the drafty walls and the leaking roof to build something new. I didn't stick around to watch. I took the check, packed my things, and moved into a condo in the city with double-paned windows and central heating that actually works. I kept the rusty biscuit tin. It sits on the top shelf of my new living room, right next to a framed photo of Margaret. It's funny what we hold on to. To anyone else, it's just a piece of junk metal. But to me, it's a trophy. It's a reminder that the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding the keys. It's proof that you don't have to be the loudest voice to win the argument. You just have to be the one holding the pen when the contract is signed. I walked over to the wall and looked at the digital thermostat. It read 70 degrees. Perfect, reasonable, comfortable. I reached out and pressed the up button. 71. 72. The vents kicked on instantly, flooding the room with warm, expensive air. I stood there and let it wash over me. For years, I had conditioned myself to shiver, because Caleb told me that comfort was a waste of resources. I had convinced myself that suffering was a form of love, that freezing in the dark was how I proved my loyalty. I know better now. Loyalty isn't about setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they're the ones holding the matches. Caleb wanted me to be small. He wanted me to be cold. He wanted me to be a resource he could use until I ran dry. He thought he could turn off my life like a switch, but he forgot that I was the one paying the electric bill. He told me to keep the heat down to save money. So I did. I saved it all for myself. If you've ever had to play dumb to outsmart a narcissist, hit that like button. And share this, for anyone who needs to know that sometimes, silence is the loudest weapon you have.